Yes, I just started it.
Okay, great. So people are aware that this is going to be recorded.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to read a land acknowledgement that was written by our very own Crystal Melendez. We dwell on the original home areas of the Lenape, Rockaway, and Canarsie nations. These communities and others like them are the original stewards of our lands. They existed pre-invasion, they existed before colonization. They pay tribute to and recognize our earth as the first ancestor. Indigenous people continue to protect and honor all wisdom, past, present, and future, and will always do so. Indigenous people have and continue to experience genocide, theft of their ancestral lands, and the other atrocities connected to colonization. It is necessary to honor these beginnings, history, and realities. It is essential to honor the ongoing legacies Indigenous cultures nurture within our communities and the lands we gather, live, learn, and work on. It is necessary to acknowledge that Indigenous communities are still here and continue to take action against harm and work for the collective healing and sustainability of humanity and the earth.
Thank you, Lauren. And now we are going to invite everyone to just have a moment of silence in honor of the trans lives that we lose continuously to hatred and brutality. People such as Oluwatoyin Toyin-Salu, who was a 19-year-old Black trans activist. People like Tony McDade, who was a Black transgender man, Jane Thompson, Raya Milton, a 25-year-old Black transgender woman. And so we will take a pause in honor of all of the people that we have lost. And we just thank you for that. And we also ask everyone to keep those people that we have lost and others that we don't know about in our considerations and our thoughts as we participate in this conversation. And one of the reasons and that we invited our panelists here to have this conversation is because they will be sharing their lived experiences, their expertise and personhood, and taking the time to answer the questions that can help us in our effort to foster more equitable and affirming practices and services for our participants, their families, and the communities that we service at Good Shepherd Services. And at this time, we're going to invite our co-moderators to introduce themselves. So Dr. Kevin Nadal or Nyala Toussaint can begin whenever you're ready.
Hey everybody, it's good to be in this space again. Thank you for having me, team. Denise, always, I'm always a yes for you, so I'm happy to be here. And so again, hey everybody, my name is Nyala Moon Toussaint. My pronouns are she and her. I come to this space in many different hats. I am a transgender advocacy coordinator at Colin Community Health Center. I am a part of the National Black Justice Coalition as the Black Trans Advisor. I'm also a minister in training at Rivers of Living Water. I also work with the Okra Project, which I know a lot of folks have been hearing a lot about that, to bridge the gap between food insecurities. And I'm also the founder of Reuniting of African Descendants. And when I come into this space, I come with the people of trans whose voices often don't get heard, who often are looking for a seat at the table, who don't just want a seat at the table, but also want power, right? I also come to the space as a daughter. I also come to this space as the mother to the motherless. I also come to this space as a healer. I also come to this space as someone who just wants to be.
Thank you, Nala. Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Nadal. I'm calling from why am I talking like I'm on a radio station? I'm here in New York, in Harlem, and I just want to say, first of all, thank you to Denise and to the entire team for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here. Of course, there's construction happening right at this moment, so I apologize for any background noise. But I come to you here as a queer Filipino-American. My pronouns are he and they. I'm a professor of psychology at CUNY, at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and the City University of New York. I am the former executive director of the Center for LGBTQ Studies, the founder of the LGBTQ Scholars of Color Network, as well as the former president of the Asian American Psychological Association, and trustee of the Filipino American National Historical Society. For me, my involvement in these different organizations aren't necessarily just because of my desire to help these communities, but because my identities are very important to me and I bring them with me everywhere into the room. And so I thank Nyala for modeling that we bring our whole selves into the room. We don't just leave one identity at the door. And it's something that I'm constantly thinking about all the time. I recognize my privilege as a person who's had access to education. I also recognize that it's very lonely being one of the few queer people of color who are a full professor in academia. And it sometimes feels like my responsibility, as well as a lot of pain and anguish that I experience and having to fight within these systems, especially when nobody looks like you, nobody loves like you. And so I always do things like this that I feel where I can be one with the community and not have to sit around and talk to people that don't get me. So I thank you, Denise, for having me today. And I'm really excited to hear all of the stories of all of our different panelists today.
Thank you, Kevin and Nala. And I am Denise Hines. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am the chairperson of the Good Shepherd Services LGBTQ work group. And I just wanted to give a shout out to that amazing work group for all of the events that they have been putting on for this month of Pride, but in particular, this one that is just, we're all just so excited about what it can be, given the types of people who said yes so amazingly to being a part of this panel. So really looking forward to this, and I thank you, each one of you panelists, for committing to being here with us today. So I think we're ready to really jump into this with no further ado. I know, I believe Kevin and Nala are going to introduce or get our panelists to introduce themselves, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And so I just want all the panelists who are part of this to introduce yourself, your gender pronouns, the work that you do, and your connection to GSS. But I also want you to introduce yourself of who else do you come in the room, right? Oftentimes we are just talked about as what we do and how we do it and for whom, but we don't talk about our people and who we come into the space as. So whoever would like to start, please.
I can go first. Hi, Nala.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dana Delgardo. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm going to talk about myself on a personal note first. Denise always tells me I'm too humble, so I need to make sure I tell you everything I do. Presently, I am a medical provider. I'm a family nurse practitioner. I'm also a father of two teenagers, 17 and 15. I live in the South Orange area. I am a medical provider for a company called Premise Health, and I am also a per diem provider at Count and Lord in New York City. Presently at Premise Health, I head up a initiative called the Trans Committee, which has been my baby. I'm really excited about it because if Premise Health sort of does work for corporations who have deep pockets, and these are the people that, and they're all healthcare providers, and these are the people that we need to educate from the top down. Also at County Lord, I do provide primary care for the LGBTQ community, to include trans health. So I've been doing this work for about, as a medical provider, a family nurse practitioner, 10 years, but as a nurse over 20. What else can I tell you about? I was in the Air Force. I retired in 2018 with full benefits. I work with a group called SPADA, which is, I think we have over 1,000 members now who are trans military people. I head up their health committee. I'm the chair for them. Let's see, what else do I do? I serve on a couple of boards. I'm on outcare.org. I'm a board member there. I'm a member of WPATH. I developed also a Facebook page called Outspoken, and I developed that for parents of gender non-conforming children, which I'm very proud of, because as a child, I could have used something like that as well. And what else? I am a man of trans experience. And I say that lastly and foremost because I think it's only a quarter of who I am. I am so much more. But people should know I have that background. And I think it's important also to know that, you know, I have a civilian perspective as a medical provider and a military perspective as a medical provider. So I'm a big advocate for the community because I believe we all should have top quality primary health care regardless. Thank you for having me. I hope I got that right, Dee.
You guys, you are who you are.
I'm getting myself because I'm trying to practice what we preach. Yes, you did a great job. Thank you, Dana.
Thank you. Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
Who's next?
I think we're going in alphabetical order.
Yeah, okay.
So Vanessa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Fuentes, and I also of trans experience. I currently work at the Department of Social Services, Human Resources Administration as an advisor, and I'm also going to Hunter College full-time. I'm trying to complete my BA in political science and a certificate in public policy. I am connected to GSS, to Good Shepherd Services, because when I was younger, I was in foster care and I aged out of the foster care system at 21. And because I was undocumented at the time, I didn't have a place to go. I didn't have an apartment. So I moved into the Chelsea Foyer program where I stayed for 2 years.
Yay.
And while I was there, I received my green card, and then I was able to get a job and go back to school. And so I just feel like my time at the Chelsea Foyer program was really crucial in sort of like helping me to be where I am today. So that's pretty much who I am. In my day-to-day work, I work with elected officials, I work with community-based organizations and individual people who reach out to me for assistance with either their SNAP benefits or cash assistance or Medicaid. So I try to stay connected with the community. I also, from time to time, go around doing workshops about how different organizations can access our services at DSS. So I work very closely with Trans Latina Network and other organizations to ensure that their clients have access to our services. And the reason I do this work is because, as Dana said, I mean, I don't, when people meet me, like, I don't introduce myself as, you know, I'm Vanessa with, you know, who happens to be trans. Like, I just, you know, that is a big part of who I am, but it's also a very small part of who I am, because I am so many other things more. And I feel like I'm very lucky to be able to work where I work at HRA and to do the work that I do and help my community. So that's me.
Thank you, Vanessa. Big up to the Chelsea foyer.
Is it my turn?
Yes.
Hey, I'm Tobly McSmith. The pronouns are he, his, him. I am so happy to be here today with y'all. The panelists are incredible and have done so much. I'm blown away by it. And, you know, this is my first kind of interaction with Good Shepherd, and the services that y'all provide sound amazing. I mean, I am just kind of in awe of everything, and I can't wait to learn more through this panel, and I look forward to helping where I can. So I am a writer. I came out with a book, Stay Gold. It came out 3 weeks ago. It was picked as an Amazon Best of the Month, Audible Best of the Month, and some other stuff. It is a young adult novel for teenagers, and it features a transgender boy in Texas, where I grew up, and he transfers to a new high school, and he goes stealth or hides his gender identity. And it's a love story between him and a cisgender woman in Georgia.
What's up, boy?
Yep. So I grew up in Texas, you know, and my experience in 90s in Texas is I had not met a transgender person or heard about being transgender. I just felt incredibly uncomfortable in my body and wrong, but not understanding that there was a way to make that better. I grew up in Austin, but was slightly more progressive, but then I went to college in Lubbock, Texas, which is kind of at the top of Texas, like where the buckle of a Bible Belt would go. That's where I went to college. And I was trying to figure out my identity and who I was there. And I went to the college LGBT, they had a club, right? So they had this website. So I went to their website, and it actually had a panic button that you could push. And if you pushed it, the website would go to an Excel document to kind of hide that you were even looking at an LGBT website. And that's how it felt growing up, is hide who you are, don't talk about it, you know. And I moved to New York, lucky enough, after I graduated, and found very much the opposite here, which was so wonderful, and met trans people and learned more and was able to transition. This happened when I was 33, so it took a couple years for me to get there. And this whole time when I was in New York, I worked at HarperCollins, the book publisher that published my book, actually. And I was the first one to come out and transition there out of the whole company and the many years that it had been there. And actually Harper is owned by News Corp, which does Fox News and all the evil news outlets. So I am proud to say I'm probably one of the first persons to transition openly there too. And then a couple years ago, you know, publishing came up with a movement called the Own Voices, OWN, Own Voices, where they were trying to get, and they continue to try to get more authors with experience writing books, so that it isn't just other people imagining a trans experience and writing it. They wanted transgender people. They want all sorts of different authors coming forward with their stories. And I was really inspired by that, because I had a story to tell. You know, I hadn't seen many books with transgender male characters going through what I did with dead naming and misgendering and wearing a chest compression binder and saving up for top surgery, and having to come out on the different levels of the everyday, come out to your family, to you know, work or school, dealing with all of these issues. So I put it all in Stay Gold. And about halfway through writing it last year, when Trump came down with the ban on transgender people in the military, I was writing this book, you know, and Trump pointed to the high cost of gender affirming healthcare for that ban, which is so silly, because when you look at the budgets, they spend much more on Viagra than they spent on gender affirming surgeries. So that was very frustrating. And I'm sitting there writing this book about this trans guy who's wearing a compression binder and saving up for top surgery. And I realized I wanted to really help with this. So along with the book, I've launched the Stay Gold Fund, and we are going to provide financial assistance for gender affirming healthcare. I partnered with the Stonewall Community Foundation. They are helping me every step of the way. I'm about halfway to the first mark, where and once we raise 50,000, we can start opening up for applications. And I just want to be out there to help help people with help them with their health care, but also kind of remove the stigma and educate people about how important gender affirming healthcare is to the well-being of a trans person. So I'm really excited about that. Yes, I also write musicals. I write parody musicals with my best friends. So they're musicals that make fun of TV shows and movies. And we had 4 of them going before COVID shut down theater. We had The Office parody, which was a parody of The Office TV show in New York and traveling the US. We had a Friends parody, parodying the Friends TV show, and it was in Vegas and in the UK, all shut down. But I just tell you that to add whatever. So that's me. Thank you.
And the cats, don't forget the cats.
Cute. Thank you, Denise. I have 2 cats. They are napping right now. You can see their tree. They're not in it. That's the only nature I have in my apartment. My 2 cats are named Bam Bam and Bananas. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
And somebody was just asking if Stay Gold is based on the Outsiders movie.
Yes, great. Yes, so yes, the book by S.E. Hinton came out in the 60s, The Outsiders, and it was a great inspiration. I've always felt like an outsider. Right now we're all insiders, but I've always felt like an outsider, and Stay Gold is from that, and I really reimagined what that meant. Because in the book, I read Stay Gold to be remaining innocence in the face of violence and everything around you. But when I think of LGBT plus community, you know, there's no time for us to be innocent, really. We're faced every day with discrimination. So really what Stay Gold means to me is staying true to yourself despite everything that's going on. And what we need for that are more allies and more protections. And that's what I'm working on. And that's what I hope the book helps.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Nyala Moon.
Hi everyone, my name is Nyala Moon, which you just introduced to me as, so I don't have to say that. My connection through Good Shepherd is that I received housing through Good Shepherd, which in turn allowed me to go to college. I just recently graduated with my MFA in film production, which is super exciting, but super kind of weird because, you know, COVID and we're shut down and the film industry is kind of shut down now. So it'll be interesting to see how, you know, we start back up and how the film industry reopens. I also interned at Good Shepherd in my undergrad in the communications department. And I worked directly under Wanda. Some of you may know her. She is the communications manager. And what led me to be a filmmaker is actually working with Wanda, because we would always, hey Wanda, we would always like talk about films. And I remember I was writing the script. And so I was telling Wanda about it, and I was like, Wanda, I'm gonna write this script. Oh, sorry, I'm lying. Actually, I was in a theater show in my undergrad, and I was reading the script, and I was talking to Wanda about it, and I was like, I can do this. Like, I can write a script. I have a story to tell. And Wanda was just like, do it. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna do it. And I did it. I shot my first film, my first short film in undergrad, and it was terrible. And then I made connections, and I shot another short film. Then I shot a web series, and I'm slightly a perfectionist, which is stereotypical for all artists. And I really wanted to understand the cinematic language, you know, because I could write, but I really wanted to visually tell stories, and I really wanted to tell the stories of my community because they were very much undertold, or it was like a tragic trans narrative, like, oh, they don't know, you know, they're trans, the trans person's gonna die, you know, and it was like, or it's just like, oh my God, I don't know if I'm trans or not, like that tired old narrative that's always in the media. Until recently, you know, it's been a boom of like trans creators and on the show Pose, but I really wanted to like do that. So I went to grad school against my better judgment. And I recently graduated from City College, and I'm very excited to get into the world and tell trans stories and further the narrative, because I firmly believe that like media and television, we live in that culture as long as television and media have been around, you know, or beyond that, storytelling and media has definitely affected how we see people, right? Back until like the controversy with Gone with the Wind, you know, how Gone with the Wind was like pulled off of HBO because it didn't honestly depict like Black people and their relation to slavery. It was like, oh my God, Black people love slavery, you know, it just works for them. And I want to do my part to further the narrative of trans people so people can see them as individuals and humans and complex. And yeah, that's my goal. Oh, I also see in my, I also contributed to a book, and it was called Written on the Body, and it was a book about trans survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence. And I was very excited to contribute to that book, even though I was initially scared, because a lot of times like trans people do not, you know, get justice for sexual assault. They don't talk about it. They live with the trauma of that forever. And I'm glad the book is out, because we did a college tour where we talked to college students and we put our stories and we listened to their stories and we let them know that, you know, like this is a real issue, and they definitely have a seat at the table. So yeah, that's me. Oh, also wait, I have to talk about else I am besides a filmmaker, right, Nyala? So I am a plant mom. I love plants. I am an anime enthusiast. I watch a lot of anime, and it's kind of weird now because my siblings have kids, and now like they're telling me about anime shows. Like it's new. Like they're like, Auntie Nyla, have you seen Dragon Ball Z, or have you seen like One Piece? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting so old now. Where a 13-year-old is telling me about anime. But yep, that's also me.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. I appreciate it. So we're going to get into our other question, but before we do, can we all collectively take a deep breath in? Release. One more time. Yeah, lately I have been committed to making sure that we all breathe, because in such a time, breath is so important that we remember how we're living and how we're connected to life. And so I want to transition us into a courageous conversation, right? How does the intersection of your racial identity and LGBTQ plus identity impact your lived experience or your life experience? And also, how do you see the impact of white privilege and racism within LGBTQ spaces? And so I want to open the floor for folks who are directly impacted, and then we create space for those who have privilege. Okay, so let's set the tone for that. Yes. And I can repeat the question.
This is for our panelists.
Yes, this is for our panelists.
I think I can talk about that a little. And I guess this kind of feeds into the story that I want to tell, because I was thinking like for like a week, I'm like, oh my God, what am I gonna say? I think that white privilege definitely affects people who are LGBT, especially like in the workforce, and especially getting access to workforce, because I transitioned when I was a teenager, and like my parents were like, and my family was just like, nope, you're not gonna survive. You're not gonna get a job. You can't make it in this world, which is a common immigrant mentality and minority mentality about how you should like be respectable, and transitioning was not respectable. So a lot of times, which is a common theme with a lot of trans people of color that I know and talk to, a lot of them get sucked into sex work. Mm-hmm. And even in spaces that are, let's say, LGBT affirming, like even a few nonprofits back in the day, they did not like provide services to trans people. Like a lot of our other LGBT white people, and not even only white people, but Black people, they were like, getting job services. They were getting resources that the trans women of color were not getting, and which it became a cycle because a lot of them, a lot of us, we got led into sex work because we couldn't get job access. And then being late at night in those places also, it was like, you got to make money or you got to choose your housing, and if you didn't get a job, you got kicked out of the program. But then a lot of places couldn't help trans people of color, and particularly Black trans women, get jobs, and Latin trans women get jobs either because of their transness. So they were discriminated from getting jobs in the workforce. They were discriminated from getting access to resources within LGBT spaces. And then they were forced into survival sex work. So it became a very vicious cycle of choosing and a lot of times trans women, they chose to make money, to survive. So a lot of trans people do get pushed out of those resources and those spaces, those LGBT friendly spaces, because they don't necessarily understand the needs of the community.
Thank you. How about you, Vanessa? What's your experience like?
I want to say that I completely agree with what Nyla said. I mean, I am also an immigrant, originally from Mexico. I came here when I was 16 years old on my own. And since I have no family in the US, it's just me. I had to find a way to survive and just to fend for myself at 16 without speaking the language, without documents. I was undocumented, as I mentioned, and I had no education. I hadn't finished high school. I didn't even have a GED, so I didn't basically have anything. And I remembered, as Nyla said, how difficult it was to access resources and services in all the places that we think about it now. If you think about Colin Lord, I know that Colin Lord right now, I think is the premier place to get access to services for LGBTQI people. But back in the 2002, when I first arrived, it was very difficult to get hormone therapy and to get I remember that they made me wait a year before they gave me a prescription, because I had to go through therapy, just because I think because they wanted to confirm that that was something that I really wanted for myself, even though I feel like I have always known my entire life, and I had always known back then that that's what I really wanted, but they still made me wait for a year. And just getting access to those type of services was very difficult, also in terms of changing your name, because sometimes you might pass, but if your name has not been changed legally, then that creates additional issues. And I remembered when I was deciding on a name, back in the 2000s, Nelly Furtado was really big. And I decided that was a name that I wanted to choose for myself. But also I remember that this is again in the 2000s, Nelly, the rapper, and Ashanti came out with a song that I used to like. And so when I used to introduce myself as hi, my name is Nelly, people used to question me. People used to sort of wonder, are you, what are you? Who are you? I decided that I needed to find a name that convey, femaleness, that didn't raise any questions whatsoever, that as soon as I said my name, people would automatically think, okay, she's a woman, she's female. So I had to switch it to Vanessa, and that's what I eventually changed it to. But those are little things that sometimes we don't really think about. And for me, I just want to be able to live my life. I don't want to raise any flags. I don't want people to notice me. I'm just trying to go about my day, going to work, going to class. I'm not there to sort of organize people or anything. I just want to be able to take my class, to get my degree, get a job, and yes, help my community. But I don't want it to be at my own expense, right? I don't want to be bullied. I don't want to be harassed. I don't want to be name called, which is something that I had to endure in the very beginning of my transition. People used to call me out on the street, that's a man, and even when I was at the foyer, I had one very small incident where one of the residents sort of like, disrespected me by making a comment, and I reported that incident to the managers at the foyer program, and they took immediate action. And I feel like that is something that will always stay with me, that there are places where you would go to and you would make a complaint or just report the issue, and people would listen to you, and there are other places that they won't. And so that's what I really like about Good Shepherd Services, that they are not they're not gonna tolerate that type of behavior. So I was really happy to feel like that they had my back.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I actually want to hear from Kevin as well, and Dr. Dana. I want to hear from both of you because you both come from a different perspective, right? As Nyla and Vanessa share their experience, right? So it's multi-layers. For folks who are listening, it's not just about race. It's not just about access. It's multi-layered, right? Whether you're a migrant to this country and trying to navigate that, also as being a person of color or being Black as well, also as being woman and femme, and also as transitioning. So I want people to recognize the multi-layered things that folks are experiencing. Is not just a one conversation. Oftentimes when we see LGBTQ folks in this space, they're not just impacted with just one major concern. And so I want you also think about how is that when you're serving children or whatever it is that you're doing, or how you're working with each other. When you're showing up in the space, you're not just showing as one piece of yourself, you're showing up as multiple pieces. So I want to turn it over to Dr. Kevin and Dana to talk about your experience from, yeah, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. And this is something that's so important for us to think about. And I sent a question that I was supposed to send to Nala privately, but I guess it went to everyone. So sorry about that. But I really want us to hear our stories and to tell our stories. And then later we can get into some of the questions that are specifically about, how we can apply all this to GSS. But one thing that I brought into the room is just this idea of privilege, and how privilege can look very differently depending on the context and the topic that we're discussing. So for example, for me, to be male assigned at birth, to be male presenting, to also be non-Black, and then also to have this educational opportunity that I have. It's a privilege that I have to navigate and know how to use that privilege for good, and to use that privilege to uplift the most marginalized, even if it's something that is inconvenient for me. And I think this is something that's very important for all of us to think about, because many of us have so many privileges that we don't think about, because when we think about privilege, people think mostly of whiteness or maleness, but there are so many ways that we have privilege, and different ways that we have biases also that we might not even recognize. I know that for me, I have to tackle so many things that I have been socialized with, from sexism to transphobia to racism to colorism to all these different things. And for me in my work, one of the things that I try to teach my students about, and try to just teach people about in general, is that we're all human beings, and if we all want to be committed to this work, we have to think about this all the time, and we constantly have to check our privileges and our biases, and we have to be vocal about these things. We can't just go around and say we're allies and be performative without doing the work every single day. And so that's something that I know that I have to work on, and I know that's something that that many of us, we don't even know how to start. But naming it, I think, is one of the most important things, to talk with your friends who have similar types of experiences with you, so that it's not just you talking about this with people who are from marginalized groups. So for example, one of the lessons that I know from these past couple of weeks is that Black people don't want to hear from non-Black people about how you as a white person are feeling. Talk about that with other white people, right? Trans people don't want to hear about your trans guilt. Talk about that with other cis those folks. And these are the things that we can do if we really get it, if we really understand, and if we really want to try to continue to advocate for other groups. And so to recognize the privileges that you have.
Yeah, and just to add, as Dana and then Tobly goes next, is that when we take our privilege and we ask someone who's marginalized, what we ask them to do is to push aside what they're experiencing and ask them to do the emotional and physical labor, without recognizing their trauma that they're experiencing, without recognizing that they need space and time to heal. And so then we come in and we ask them about their identities, and we ask them about what they're experiencing, about their race. We take away that moment to heal. Right. And so, Dr. Dana, I want you to turn it over to you now, and then Tobly will go next from your perspective.
Okay, can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, so the question is mostly about the intersecting, about not just being a person of color or Black, but how does your racial identity plays into also your identity, either as, you know, gay, lesbian, trans, queer. How does it play? How does it intersect into your lived experience, your life experience? And how does white privilege play in that, you know, for folks? How do you recognize it? How do you see it?
I think on a personal level, growing up in Boston and I'm going to age myself, I was bused out of Roxbury, Dorchester to West Roxbury. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. I was told that we were going to be basically going into a better environment because it was predominantly white and the schools were predominantly white, and we would get a better education. So, I mean, sometimes I think when I look at my life, I have some privilege and entitlement to some extent, because I did go to university for 4 years. I did I grew up in a predominantly white school. I learned the language. I went to university for 4 years. Then I joined the military, and I commissioned, and I got I became a medical provider. I had a chance to expand on that. But then, you know, throughout the process, I dealt with life as a person of color, as a woman. I dealt with life as a person of color, as a lesbian. I dealt with life as a person of color, as a man, which came with a little bit more privilege. But, you know, being a light-skinned man who's educated tends to fit the narrative a little bit better. It's easier for people to swallow. So my path was difficult in some ways, but not so difficult in others. But I think what I decided is that I was going to put myself in the best position I could possibly be to help my community. So if I needed to learn how to speak the language, walk the walk, do the talk, I was going to do that, because I wanted to be in a position where I could provide and make sure that people who are underserved and had less than were getting quality, and this is as a provider, getting quality care, health care. So as a provider, I think it was important because folks who, like when I worked at Callan Lord, who would walk into the room would see me and they would be like, oh, I have a mirror picture of somebody who looks like me and has struggled at the same, you know, had the same struggles. And this person has persevered and stayed above things and is, you know, providing healthcare right now. So it's sort of, you know, I know most of my patients who come in have struggled and been, you know, harassed, discriminated against, prior to them even sitting down in front of me. So it was important for me to set a tone that was not hostile at all, very inviting and open, and truly to hear their stories, which was a good education for me. But I also think in these organizations, we cannot have our trans folks being in positions where they're not upheld in high esteem, meaning they can't always be the navigator. They can't always teach teach leadership, the ins and outs, without being getting some kind of benefit out of it, whether it's monetarily or putting them into a position where they are overseeing other folks. I mean, I can say that if I walk in and the leadership is all white, cis, or gay men, I'm taken aback, because you cannot serve folks in a certain population if they can't see themselves. So I guess that's what's important for me is, you, as white, cis, or as white folks, we need to like take note of our trans people who are educated and working to better themselves, and put them in positions of leadership, so they can, so other people can see that, they can be there too. That's important to me.
Oh, I was sitting on my phone.
I guess that's it for me.
Thank you. Marie, I think your phone is off mute. Can you just mute yourself as we're discussing? Thank you so much.
Sorry.
No worries, no worries. Listen, we're virtual. We're making it work the way we can, right? And so, something that you said, Dr. Dana, is the colorism is also a part, but you mentioned something about who's at the table and how important that piece is, right? Especially when we're at an act of service to communities. If you're serving communities and the community that you're serving is not reflective, then we're actually not serving. What we're doing is tokenizing that community, or we're coming from a savior complex. And we know that too familiar, right? And so I want to turn it over also to, before we transition to our next question that's going to be led by Dr. Kevin, to Tobly.
Hey, this is incredible. All of these answers are so amazing. I understand I come from a place of privilege, especially as a passing white male. And I plan and have been planning and planning to continue more to help lift up Black voices and everything else. And book publishing is really looking at this right now, and it's amazing. They're looking at every level, and they absolutely should. The statistics were horrifying. They're looking at it from the authors, from what the authors are paid, from the agents, from who's sitting at the table, as you say, making the decisions and everything. And I feel like every place has to do that right now. And, I'm happy to give up my seat at the table for someone else right now, because it's just where it is, and I come from Texas, and I know how the middle of the country thinks, and it's going to take a longer to get there, but it's these stories and this moment that's going to help it get there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for uplifting that, because what you name, what's a part of the work, right? What's the work that's required for transformation, that a conversation that we've needed to have for so long within our world, right? What does that work look like? So thank you for naming what it looks like, a piece of what the work is required of many of us who hold privilege in many different ways. Dr. Kevin?
Yeah, so I want to just also acknowledge one thing that Nyala did that was very, very important is centering the voices of people who come from marginalized experiences first, allowing them to speak first, particularly when it comes to these issues. Oftentimes, I know I've sat in many meetings, either in academia or in nonprofit organizations, and where white male cis men are the first ones to speak. They always have something to say. If you're a white cis man, it happens. And so to reflect on why that is, why is it that you need to be the one to take up space? And so even just the practice of inviting people, and inviting, not forcing, because again, forcing then leads to this tokenization and this, this idea of additional stress and trauma that might be put onto people of marginalized experience, particularly if you're the only one. And so to really model that by centering the voices of those. The other thing that really stuck out to me was what Dana had mentioned, which is this idea of walking into a room and seeing people that aren't like you, whether it's race or gender or sexual orientation identity. But to understand that that's a lived experience for so many of us. And for so many people, when you walk into those rooms, you want to just turn around and walk away. But there's this catch-22 that if you don't stay in that room and demand your seat at that table and make your voice heard, then perhaps you're not giving voice to people that aren't able to be at that table. And then at the same time, staying in that room causes so much additional stress and re-traumatization of past experiences. And so it's just a really tough situation to be in. And so again, I ask people who have more privileged identities to think about how you can make that experience more palpable and more healing for people who have to go through that all the time. It might be something as even just acknowledging, like, hey, I noticed there were a lot of white people in the room today. What was that like? To even making those systemic changes, whether it's in hiring practices. Hiring is a very important thing that a lot of times people just take for granted because they say things like, oh, well, no Black people applied for the position, or no trans people applied to the position. But did they not apply because, one, your organization isn't one that they would want to work at? Or did they not apply because you didn't market to them in some way? Or did they not apply because your requirements are such that wouldn't allow somebody from that experience to come to your company? So these are a lot of the many systemic things that people should think about, because it's not just what you want to do as a person, it's embedded in systemic oppression. Many of these organizations, whether it's nonprofits in the nonprofit industrial complex, to the justice system or the not so justice system or the complete injustice system, they were built to further oppress people. And so this is why the conversations are about abolishing these institutions, because these institutions weren't meant to benefit people of historically marginalized groups. So even though you might want to make a change, that system wasn't set up for that change. That system wasn't set up for social justice. And so maybe the major change needs to happen from the systems, and it's not something that even just one person, even if that one person has power, that they could do. I want to just shift to talking more stories. And I think what's really important is for people on the call to hear some of the stories of the panelists, and for them to reflect upon how some of these stories can be helpful in their own work with different communities. I know that Vanessa mentioned aging out of the foster system, and others mentioned services, obtaining services through GSS. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of the struggles, needs, and aspirations of queer and trans youth within the foster care system, or even just anyone who might need access to GSS, and how would those differ than non-LGBTQ youth in this system? So what are some of the specific needs of queer and trans youth, those who would to come into contact with GSS, particularly foster, those in the foster system? And what are some of those things that you think that people should be aware about?
So I think that, having a supportive staff, even if they don't agree, right? Because when I was in a group home, and there were some staff members that didn't necessarily agree with my lifestyle or my choice, but they were still respectful, and they still honored my preferences, right? Like my gender pronouns and that type of thing. But I think that, for young people who are in foster care, again, they need a lot of support, a lot of resources, I think, and just helping them navigate the different places that they want to go to, whether that's getting access to healthcare, whether that's getting access to an education, whether that's getting access to a job. There were many times when I was at the foyer, including that I used to come home from work, and I used to go talk to the staff there and just, vent, and just like they used to help me process everything that happened during that day. So I think the support is very important. I don't think that every trans person is going to have the same experience, but I think that to the extent that the support can be there and that staff can, be a resource for them, again, even if they don't completely agree with the choices that the young person is making. I think that that's very important.
Thank you. If I'm able to, can I jump in as well? I think something that comes to me as sharing is that we remembering that kids come into this world without asking. They're just brought into this world, right? And so sometimes children are looking for understanding. They're looking for someone to guide them and to show them love at the same time. And so when we have our kids who are put into foster care, they're navigating the abandonment, they're navigating many layers, multiple layers of the whys. And so they're looking for someone to hear them, listen, but also guide them in a way that feels right to their being, the very essence of who they want to be. And so sometimes what's required in our work and how we're serving is to create that space of listening, is to create that space of empathy. You know, oftentimes children don't get to hear the, I'm sorry this is happening to you, but I'm here with you. I'm here to support you. And so our language have to also be intentional to empower them to have agency that they will get through this, or they're in the process and the journey of figuring what works for them. And so I think along with adding the resources and the tools is that we are with them in languages that has empathy and affirmation, right? Imagine a child not having a home where they're receiving that affirmation and sharing spaces with other people they don't know. So those pieces are very important. And that even in ourselves and as we're going through our days and we're experiencing life and life is life and people are people, that we sit and remember and say, wait, this is a child. This is a child. And that we be connected on what's needed and required in that moment.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think one of the things that that I hope folks on the call will take into consideration is this idea of foster kids who, especially LGBTQ youth, who are in foster care because their families at birth aren't able to provide them what they need. And so when they get into programs like GSS or other programs, you're the first people that they're going to see that they hope will support them in some way. And I've done some research on queer and trans folks in the foster care system. Many of them age out because, you know, oftentimes they are unable to find homes that can care for them, and they're unable to find programs that care for them. And we know that there are states that are trying to make it even harder for queer and trans folks to get the services that they need when it comes to their sexual orientation, gender identity. And so to really think about, it's not just that you don't agree or don't understand sexual orientation or gender identity, but just this idea of like, you're perhaps one of their last hopes. And when we think about the suicidal ideation rates as well as the suicide rates of queer and trans people, particularly queer and trans people of color, when we think about the homeless rates, 40% of youth in New York City are LGBTQ, when perhaps only 10 to 20% of youth identifies LGBTQ. So you are twice as likely, perhaps 3 times as likely to be homeless if you're an LGBTQ youth in New York City. And these are things that are very real. And then at the same time, going back to my earlier point about systemic change, is we have policies now on New York State levels that says we don't just want you to think about being queer and trans affirming, but you are required to be queer and trans affirming. That when foster parents sign up now to be foster parents, they have to go through queer and trans training, as you all do as providers in these systems who get funding from these systems. And so it needs to be both. It needs to be that you yourself as cares about people of marginalized groups, in this case LGBTQ youth as well as LGBTQ youth of color, but there also need to be these policies on governmental levels as well as within your agencies that say that this is something that we are requiring for you to do. I only know about these policies. I had no idea about these policies until I became a foster parent myself. And I had to write an essay about how will you raise your kid to be in a queer environment. And my husband and I said, I guess we'll breathe and we'll talk about our lives, because that was a requirement. And so I hope that we take that even more so, that it's not just the bare minimum of writing an essay, but that every single person in every single aspect, from the first person that greets them at the front desk, to the counselors and the social workers, to foster parents themselves, to the CEOs, everyone needs to be well-versed in this language, and everybody needs to be trans and queer affirming.
Thank you. Does anyone want to uplift anything else before we transition into the next question? As you were saying something that came to me was that also being intentional about, when you have a kid in front of you who are, things are going in the home and with the parent, be mindful how you address their parent. And what I mean by that, how you talk about that parent. We don't know everyone's story. And if we are very clear about the system that we're in, there is systemic oppression that leads someone to have a child in foster care. And so when you put a weight on, for example, your mom is a bad mother, or, be very intentional of not doing that. You don't know what kind of healing can take place in history where that child can heal and offer that parent grace for not knowing or not having, right? We can feel angry, yes. Never take away from the feeling of feeling hurt, but be more angry of the system that is creating that. How do we bridge the gap in our yes? How do we bridge the gap in our yes in serving children, but also family? And so I wanted to uplift that. Anyone else want to share before we go into the next question?
Hey, it's Tobly. Just to jump in on the word aspirations, I mean, so much of figuring out your gender identity and that journey is surviving. In Texas, I was just surviving minute to minute, and it wasn't until I found a public library that was safe enough, that I felt safe enough that I could dream about being a writer. So it is important to think about what these kids' dreams are and what their passions are, and doubling down on that, and giving them those opportunities and safe spaces to dream big. Because, the suicide rate is terribly high, 41% attempt, and having bigger dreams and aspirations is a good way to lessen that number, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that. And so as we're discussing, what are some things or ways what do we have to unlearn? What do we have to unlearn? What do we have to unlearn in order to provide service to respect gender diversity and affirm gender non-conforming, trans, and non-binary individuals' experience in their intersecting identities?
I just want to jump in on
Yes, absolutely.
everything that you guys have just said, because I think it's very interesting too that, like, when people think of trans people and genderqueer people in their decision to live in their truth, they think of it as like you are making an adult decision, so you must think you're an adult, versus it actually being like, no. Deciding to transition and to be a trans person, to be a queer person, that's not really an adult decision. Like, research shows that people decide this when they're children. They know who they are when they're young children at a basic primary level. And that attitude where and it also happens too with Black kids, it happens where people see Black kids older than what they are. And that, for me, spills into trans people.
Yes.
And particularly trans women. People see trans kids as older than what they are. They're like, so you know who you are, you're an adult, I'm not gonna help you because I disagree with your decisions. When that is the opposite. And a lot of times, like, when I talk to a lot of my trans friends, when we transition together, we always go back to like, damn, we were like 15, we were 16 years old. Like just recently, I feel like I am an adult, but like then, because I didn't have support or access, I was forced to do adult things, and I was forced to age up. But really, I was a teenager, like a lot of my friends, we were teenagers trying to survive, like probably just mentioned, living minute to minute. And I feel like that attitude affects a lot of like how we provide services to trans people. And also a lot of trans women live with the language of like, you are a man, And when we actually think about what is a man, like a man is someone who, like can provide, for his family, who can pay bills, who can like, who legally a man, you know, like we think of that and we put that heavy weight onto trans people, you know. We don't ever think of like teenage trans people or young trans people as children, you know, as people who still need protecting and nurturing because they've decided to make this decision to transition or to live honestly, you know. And also we have to remember like that becomes a huge like a windfall upon them, and particularly in like, you know, like getting services and getting care. Like I remember when I used to be at the Covenant House, and a lot of the workers, like they would not help me simply because I was trans, you know, simply because my decision to be trans, and actually it wasn't a decision, you know, like I was called, I didn't call it, you know. And they look at it like, I don't agree with what this decision you made, so you shouldn't, I'm not going to help you, you know. It's against my Christian values, it's against my like cultural values. And so I just want to, as you guys work with young people, and particularly queer young people, remember that they are children, you know, and deciding to transition or being trans is not an adult decision, you know. And a lot of those like barriers prevent them from actually like being kids, you know, and growing up and making mistakes and developing, and it stunts their development.
Yeah. I thank you for saying that. You ended on a piece that we also forget sometimes in these conversations to tie into, and that's theology. You said, you know, Christian, right? And we see in different practicing faith or faith practices that sometimes folks use that as a barrier to show up in love and light. Sometimes sometimes that becomes a barrier when actually that is not of the God of our understanding when we're centering love and light. That is not the thing of any God that's good and divine, to leave anyone out, to serve someone with light and resource. And so I just want to say that. But what else do we have to unlearn as people? And so something that you also said, Nyla, is that men are able to provide. So I want to actually break that down, because we also got to be intentional of how we uphold gender norms and system, right? I know many women who are able to provide, right? And so there's a call of how we hold men, right? And how we create gender norms and how we name things and put responsibility on people. Because in a way, we also have to recognize on how we uphold the system of how men interact with women across the identity spectrum. Not saying that you said anything wrong, but inviting us to even look at that, right? How oftentimes we call children who are transitioning, for example, trans women, and we say, oh, that's a man. Well, what is it to be an adult? What is it to be of a man? What does that actually mean? What are you actually saying? And so we have to recognize to challenge those things when we hear those things. What are you actually saying? What do you mean? Do you recognize what you're saying?
I also want to say, sorry, I also want to say something. I mean, you mentioned, you know, what are some of the things that we can unlearn, right? Like I kept thinking about what Nyla was saying about, you know, like being a man, but also being a woman, right? I think that sometimes, you know, when female to from male to female trans women are transitioning, right? I think in my experience, they have this idea of what a woman looks like and is supposed to behave like, right? So they think of the, you know, the Sofia Vergara's, you know, who have huge breasts and like a nice, you know, round butt and, you know, long, beautiful hair and like, and wears heels and makeup and all of this. And that is, for me as a woman, a lot of pressure, right? Like every single day, I have to get up, you know, in the past, not so much now, because thank God I've gone through many years of therapy and I've learned to accept myself more as I am, like more naturally. But in the very beginning, I used to go up the stairs to take the subway in stilettos and heels and skirts and fake eyelashes and like all this, you know, tons of makeup, because that is what a woman, I thought, is supposed to look like. A woman that always smells nice, so always putting on a nice perfume and bangles and earrings and the feminine bag and all of these things. And it's not only a lot of work, but it's also very expensive. right? If you go to the pharmacy and you buy a razor, it's actually more expensive a razor for a woman than a razor for a man, right? And there are other things that women need, right? Like foundation, the eyeshadow, the makeup. And when you're first transitioning, you need the wig, and you want the different things, because you want to look, you want to look like a woman, of what a woman is supposed to look like. And again, that's just a lot of work, and it's exhausting. And there are days in the past that I remember that I just wanted to be at home with a t-shirt on and no makeup on, let my skin breathe for a minute, but I couldn't, because I was always afraid that someone, like my roommate or someone else, was going to find out. And like even now, like in my current situation, right, like I have to be careful, because I'm trying to portray something that, trying to sort of like not out myself, like here and in school and work. And again, that's a lot of pressure for a person, for a trans person, to have to endure every single day, right? Like sometimes when you pass, you have to, pretend and play this game, play this role everywhere you go. If you go to the bodega store, if you go to do laundry, everywhere you go, it's with you 24/7, and it's exhausting.
It's almost like that microscope effect. Like you look like your life is being looked at through a microscope. Mm-hmm.
Right. Right.
Just to jump in what Vanessa said.
And if you're not wearing makeup or wearing heels or like, having a handbag, then people start looking at you differently. Oh, well, that's not a woman. You start raising sort of like flags for people, because why is that person always wearing pants or like long sleeves or not wearing skirts, like those type of things. And those are the things that you're trying to run away from. But again, you raise those, I think, those suspicious sort of flags for people in general.
I agree too, from what Vanessa's saying and what Nala's also saying, that like those like stereotypes are survivability tactics. Like you, like trans women in particular, because I can only speak from my experience, they do those things to survive in the world. Like when you see a trans woman and you're like, why is she dressed so sexy? Like why is she like doing this? She's doing the most. Like those things are specific things that trans people do to survive in this world. And because, like, of course, we have stereotypes of being a man and being a woman, but also trans women, you don't get the option to opt out of not fitting into that stereotype. Because I remember, and also how it affects people, because I remember also too that like, like I passed and I fit, and I'm lucky enough to do that, but a lot of my trans sisters don't. And like a lot of like service providers, they would tell me, they'd be like, Nyla, you're so pretty, but what about her? Like, why doesn't she fit in? Why doesn't she look like this? Like, and that's double layer too, because one, I have to like explain
it's a microaggression.
It's a microaggression, and then I have to look at you crazy because I'm like, oh my God, why did you say this? I liked you as a person. Now I know you're transphobic and you're putting this pressure on me. And it's definitely a lot of work to like fit into these like binary boxes, because like the honest truth is if you don't play the game, you won't get paid, you won't survive in this world. And that's very real.
Thank you. I want to turn it over
I think,
to Dana. Yeah, please jump in, please.
Sure. I think we have to unlearn that the binary ideology.
Yeah.
Gender's fluid. It can be anywhere on the spectrum. You just have to meet that person wherever they may be. We're all different and we're all human at the end of the day, right? We're just human beings trying to survive in this world. So, I think when I think of unlearning binary ideology, I think of Miss Major. And I don't know if anybody knows Miss Major, but she was a trans woman who did a lot of advocacy in California and New York. But her life was phenomenal. I mean, she wasn't stuck in these stereotypes or stuck in what she should be as a woman. I mean, she still was able to have children, raise her son who accepted her for who she was. And, you know, and I reflect on my own life. I mean, yeah, you know, when I was younger, I identified as a lesbian and I was fine with loving women, but I never had issues with body, you know, having, for lack of better term, female genitalia, you know, it didn't matter to me because, you know, love is love. So I think we have to unlearn the binary ideology of what a male should be and what a female should be, and just be human beings. And I think once we do that, we'll have a better world.
Thank you so much. So we don't have as much time left, and I know we want to get to some audience questions, but I want to ask a more general question to the panelists of things that you think could be helpful for this agency. And one of the questions that we asked that we have here is how do you think that people can be more gender affirming in their language and in the services they provide? So how can people be more gender affirming in the language and the services that they provide? And knowing that the agency and people on the call might consist of people who have direct services and contact with LGBTQ folks or trans folks and genderqueer folks, but as well as people who might work in different capacities in the agency. What do you think?
Hey, it's Tobly. I'll jump in here. And it kind of connects with the last thing. And it's about a bias, right? I've been thinking about how bias works for us and against us these last couple months. And, you know, we are given bias through the media and everything. And we have certain ideas of what a male is and what a female is, what we've been talking about. And these ideas are given to us and we see them. And they're also a way to quickly identify people. It's a survival tactic that everyone has. We create these bias in our heads and we rely on them for quick thoughts. But they really work against us in so many ways. And when it comes to trans and non-binary people, there is no one box for us because there's so many different kind of people dealing with different kind of issues. And so it's really important to not try to put trans or non-binary people in one specific box, because we don't fit in that at all. And, you know, bias, just on a personal level, from growing up in Texas, I had so much bias against trans people, against myself. I believed that you're born in the body that you're in, and it's your duty to live in that body. It's something I had believed in my head so much that when I came to New York and met other trans people, I wasn't like, wow, I'm open and now this is who I am. I actually fought against it so hard that I tried to commit suicide. I'm in that statistic. My bias against who I was made me go to the point of trying to destroy myself. And so I just urge everyone to think about the bias that you have in your head and how you put people into boxes, and to challenge that and to feel uncomfortable by it. Because if mine could almost kill me, like, what is everybody's doing to how you perceive people?
Yeah, and if I could piggyback off that, I do a lot of training for medical providers, behavioral health providers. And I think, you know, staff education on cultural competency, implicit bias, intersectionality, and how to care for the LGBTQ community, some training in the front facing staff, your intake forms, sometimes waiting room visuals help, gender neutral bathrooms, even wearing a pin on your jacket can show somebody that you're an ally. You know, they can do some classes, webinars, conferences. They need to learn the terminology, Gender 101 basic terminology, get familiar with guidelines. You know, there's a lot out there to care for this population. You have WPATH, you have Fenway has some great seminars that you can use to learn, and you know, find your champion in your organization, somebody who's passionate about this, and you got to engage leadership, get them committed. You know, also you got to do it on a technological. You know, you got to with meaningful use, which came into effect, I think 2015. Institute of Medicine, Healthy People's 2020, all these guys want us to start collecting this data, because meaningful use, this is going to be the money that goes in certain organizations' pockets. If they're not doing this, they're not going to be able to reap any benefits. So you have to get technology involved, and you can do it in a pilot program with a small group. And you know, you just got to fashion the program to your organization, and you can do brochures. And SOGI, which is sexual orientation and gender identity information, has to be collected to validate, you know, research and where we need to focus our attention at, where we're lacking research. So those things are just small things that you can do. Yeah, I think that's important.
Can I just add to that? So I think the whole issue for me of gender neutral bathrooms are really important, and I hadn't really realized how sort of like more convenient but also important they are now that I have access to them at work. Because for me personally, going to a public restroom is excruciating. You know, as somebody who has not completely transitioned, for me, it creates a lot of anxiety that even in public restrooms, that people are going to see things or observe things through that little space between the door and where you lock the door. Is just, it makes me so anxious to go to a public restroom. Also because, like, when I wash my hands, I try to wash my hands like this with my head down, and I wash them really quickly, and then I get out, because I feel like if I put myself right in front of the mirror, people are going to start like questioning me. And I know that's not real, maybe. I think, you know, is part of like the whole gender dysphoria that some trans people experience every day, you know, for many years. I know that I experience that. I see things in the mirror that no one else sees, but that doesn't mean that it's not real or that it isn't there, right? Just because other people don't see the things that I think I see doesn't mean that those emotions and those feelings aren't real. They're there. And so again, you know, I think that the gender neutral restrooms are very important for people who experience that type of anxiety. And so I think, I don't know to what extent Good Shepherd Services is converting some of the public restrooms that they may have for their clients, but there are other people who need that extra privacy for whatever it is that they're doing, right? Like when I was going through surgeries, I needed to do certain things to clean myself up and like do other things that I couldn't do in a public restroom, and I needed a private place to do that. And so those are the things that I think that we have to sort of like think about in terms of like making those accommodations for people that may need that additional privacy.
Yeah, something I wanted to also uplift, just to acknowledge the space that as we're sharing, we're only sharing from also recognizing how binary also plays in trans identities, is that we also don't have space, are holding space for genderqueer folks and also non-binary folks. So I just want to highlight that in this panel, that this space is particularly what I can see is coming from trans women and trans men, but we also are missing a piece of non-binary people and also genderqueer and gender fluid. So I just want to uplift that in this moment, that while we're talking about bathroom, that bathroom sometimes also can be quite anxiety producing when folks who are non-binary don't follow binary norms and all of that existence, that how that can also show up for them as well. So just creating space for that too.
And I just want to jump in as well. Thank you, Nyala, for that. And also to mention just this idea of trauma. And so Vanessa, you know, you talked about this idea of, you know, is it real or is it not? Can people really see this or not? But this is what happens for many of us that come from different experiences, that we have the knowledge of pain and hurt and violence towards whatever identity. So in this case, as a trans person, you know that trans people have been violently attacked and assaulted and continue to be. And so your paranoia is actually real because this is something that's still happening today. We have also this idea of racial trauma, this idea that people walk around, people of color, Black people particularly, walk around and are vigilant of whether or not a police officer might do something violent towards them, because it's real. And so that's something that I want to name as well, is this idea of the trauma, not just of your own personal experiences, but the collective trauma that a lot of us bring with us to certain spaces. And it's not necessarily even whether it's logical or not, because sometimes this trauma gets carried down through generations and then manifests in just the most innocuous of situations. And so for people who come from privileged identities on the call right now, whether you're a cis person or a white person, that's something that you may never ever understand, this trauma that people of historically marginalized groups face. And then if you come from multiple marginalized groups, that's multiple layers of trauma that people bring with them. Another thing that I want to name is this idea of something that Tobly mentioned, which is the self-hatred or the negative biases that you might have about groups that you identify with. And that's also real. And this is what sometimes people call internalized oppression, and specifically internalized transphobia, internalized homophobia, internalized racism. But because we've all been socialized in this world that has taught us very negative and harmful messages about groups that we even believe, or that we belong to, that we then believe those things. And you could be a 30-year-old, 40-year-old, a 70-year-old who's done a lot of work and gone through therapy and done a lot of self-reflection, but sometimes those decades of negative messages that you have learned are very hard to unlearn. And so that's another thing that I want to name, and for people to think about that, because it just doesn't go away. You don't come out of the closet and then all of a sudden like, yay, I have no more self-hate, but rather that it's a process. And I also, appreciated that people talked about therapy and just, self-reflection, but also to recognize that while therapy is amazing, some people don't have access to that. And so what are some of the ways that we can provide people with limited resources, people who come from these multiple marginalized identities, the opportunities to learn some of these things that people might gain through therapy. So just to name also, we are at the 30, we have just 20 minutes left. So I don't know if people have questions that they want to ask.
There was one question, Kevin, in the chat, and certainly people can ask their questions out loud, but I'll do this one first because it's there. I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but the person who asked it, if you're willing to, you could speak up. It says, can we speak about ableism and transgender people? What can we do to unlearn there, and what needs to be done in terms of support? So
that's big, that's huge. That's a good question. And because oftentimes when we think about people who are differently able-bodied or differently able-minded, right, we forget that the ability to do things look different for everybody. And so even when we're communicating with our who we're providing service to, sometimes we get frustrated when we think the norm of how they're supposed to be showing up or how they're supposed to be registering the information. And so that it takes us doing work within ourselves to take a moment like, oh, this person might not have the capacity or the ability to do it in the way that I normally see others doing it. That takes work. That is a daily practice,
Thank you.
Yeah,
So
I think also just to further that is just, we need to think about ableism more often. It's something that gets, forgotten about to the point that, without this question, I don't know that we necessarily even would have talked about ableism explicitly. And so it's something that happens when people are able-bodied, that's such a privilege in itself that we don't even think about the impact of our ability status. And when it comes to these topics today of trans and queer people, and then haven't intersected with people of color, that becomes an even bigger obstacle. When we see even, you know, a lot of these police killings, a lot of times these are people with disabilities, the targets, people with mental health issues, another disability that oftentimes people don't think about. And so these are conversations that we need to have. And one thing that I have to always be reflective on is just how ingrained ableist language is in our everyday life. So whenever times people say things like blind spots, or they say things like we need to stand for justice, those are all ableist terms, implying that everyone has those same types of abilities. And so for us to just really be cognizant. I forgot to mention also that when Nyla was talking, Nyla mentioned the word microaggressions, and that's something that I hope people can be very vocal and cognizant about as well, not just in calling out other people who commit microaggressions, but for you to be reflective of your own microaggressions. When you use ableist language, that's a microaggression, and oftentimes people aren't going to call you out on that, especially if you are a person with power or perceived power and you commit a microaggression. That will probably go unchecked. And so it's up to you to acknowledge that, wait, I said something and I don't think that sounded right, or I said something and I saw you reacted differently, or you made a face. I acknowledge that was a really fucked up thing for me to say, or to just think about just what it was that I said. And that's something that takes a true ally, right? Or a true accomplice, as we should say, not just somebody that is performing allyship, but somebody who's really committed to the work, to acknowledge your mistakes, to take accountability, to name microaggressions. And what I hope that the culture of GSSs or just any other agency is that to have the language to talk about all of these things, so that it's just part of the culture. So when somebody says something, for someone else to say like, hey, that was a microaggression, because then that becomes something that is easier for people to deal with than letting things linger, and then people not having the opportunity to speak up, because now it feels like it's been built up so much that this environment is just completely hostile.
Thank you. Anybody else have a burning question they'd love to ask the panel? While you're thinking, something that came up in our LGBT work group, we were talking a lot about trauma, because we are a trauma-informed organization, and we really spend a lot of time thinking about the impact of past traumas on our young people that we work with. So just wondering from the panel, are there things, and you may have answered this before, but it'd be helpful to repeat it. Are there things that you think our staff should be thinking about in working with LGBT folks across the spectrum in regards to the impact of the trauma that they've experienced, not only in their lives, but also in the coming out experience?
That's a great question. Something about when I heard the word trauma, also recognize that if you're a person of color, if you're Black, if you're African descent, there's trauma within our DNA, right? So often looking at our trauma responses, right, when we're working with kids who are experiencing trauma, right? And so that's also a huge piece, is recognize, how do you normally respond to trauma, right? Because there's a thing of vicarious trauma as well. When we're working with youth and a youth is going through something, it might take us back to a place that we've been. It might take us back to a place that we're like, oh, wow. And so sometimes we might even shut down when we need to be present for that youth, right? And so when we're working on our trauma response, and we're able to support them through their trauma, right? How to listen and how to hold space, not trying to give answers, but trying to figure out what do they need in that moment.
Yes. Anybody else on the panel want to respond to that? Okay. I'm not sure if panelists are muted. but just knowing who you are, I'm sure you have a lot of responses to this. Someone in the chat is asking, where should a young person go if they're looking for community and friends in New York City? Someone who isn't connected to an organization like GSS.
That's a great question. If it's support group for youth, you know, Conlord has one that's from 13. I think the Door has one, HMI, but remember, all communities look different. So, you know, you have communities within communities, you know, so you have folks who are Yoruba practice, you have folks who are in the ballroom scene, you have folks who are radicals, like each community has communities within communities. So it's just finding the one that speaks to who they are. And that sometimes can be a process and a journey in itself.
Right.
Yeah, and you know, also the center has as well, but I think myself as a trans man, I started out in Facebook groups, which are pretty benign, and you don't have to really let anybody see you, and you could just kind of peruse the questions, and someone is always going to have the same experience to some extent to help you figure out that stuff. And that's where I would start. But yeah, if you want to be in person somewhere, the center, Hedrick Martin, Callen-Lorde, they all
Thank you.
good places.
And for the two panelists who are not quite so fully out of their youth, are there organizations or ways that you've gotten support that you would want to share with the group?
I think that, and particularly for trans women of color, like it's always been like hard, you know. So it's always like you meet another trans woman and they like, you know, steward you into like other resources that can help you. But I also think that like a lot of, like we've talked about, like a lot of other nonprofits have done great jobs. Like Housing Works has done a great job of offering like a drop-in service that is kind of more catered to the ballroom community, but it's also like a place where like youth can like just go and, you know, hang out with other LGBT youth, you know, and get to know other people and, you know, find community there. But I mean, I am young, but I'm a little old now. So like when I was young, when I was a teenager, you know, like you would just go to Christopher Street, you know, and you would just like, you would meet the girls, you know, and like that's where it happened, you know. I haven't been to Christopher Street in a long time, and I know it's changed a lot since gentrification, you know, and a lot of like the white elite who live there do not want to see, you know, like queer people, you know, Black trans women like doing sex work or hanging out while they're eating, you know, so it's changed a little bit. But I know Housing Works provides like a lot of like space for like people to like drop in and like meet other people, and it's not necessarily hinging on like them providing a service for you too, you know, because a lot of nonprofits, you know, like access to their space is contingent on like you doing the service, you know. So it's kind of hard, you know, for a lot of queer youth, especially if they're not ready to receive a service too, you know, because like a lot of times people have to be ready to receive services, to access services, and sometimes a lot of nonprofits are like, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, which is definitely good intention, but like a lot of times it can hinder like youth from like, you know, just being in that space, you know, and being with other people in that moment.
That is such a great point. Thank you for sharing that. And so there's another question here about how can we help? The first one is, can you share a moment or reaffirming experience that you felt was pivotal for your development and growth? Is there a moment or pivotal experience that helped you in your development and growth?
I think that,
Yeah, I can say for me, open trans service was pivotal in my growth as an officer in the military. I can remember the date, June 30th, 2016, when it was like, wow, I can actually be myself now, recognize for who I am. So I like just took and tried to, there's a program in the military called DEERS, and it's sort of like your social security card. So I did everything I did to get my paperwork in place so I could update my DEERS to affirm my gender as male and have my kids on there. And I mean, it just put me in line that when I retired in 2018, I was one of the first trans men to retire with full veteran benefits.
Oh, Dana.
Yeah.
Yes. Nyla, I think you were saying you wanted to say something about this.
I think it's very interesting because, like, for me, it's always been like trial by fire. You know, it's always been like when I was like rejected from something, and then it was that moment where I was rejected, where I was just like, oh crap, I need to like, you know, like affirm myself, you know, and lead myself to the next level. But there's definitely been like just little moments, you know, that have definitely like gotten me through, you know, that have been extremely monumental. Like, I remember when I was a teenager, someone asked me, you know, they were just like, what's next, you know? And I know Tobly talked about this too, you know, like, because a lot of times, you know, when we're working with queer youth, we're just like, you know, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. But a lot of times we're not like talking about like, what are your dreams? What are your passions? Who are you?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like what makes you happy? Like you know, and that question isn't asked enough to like trans and gender non-conforming youth, because a lot of times, you know, we're working in an area of scarcity, you know, like where you need to get an HIV test, you know, you need to like do this, you need to do this, but which is also again very great, but like those questions need to be asked, like, you know, like who do you want to be when you grow up, you know, like what makes, like what do you want to do actually, you know, because also too, like, which is helpful, but a lot of trans people do get like pushed into the nonprofit sector, you know. It's like it's a job, yes, you know, and it's definitely an opportunity, but like some trans people have dreams beyond that, you know, and they don't know that they can get those dreams because one, they don't have family, and two, you know, they're being like crunched through the service machine. So for me personally, I think it's people asking me like, what do you want to do, you know, like, because a lot of times you don't think of like, oh my God, I'm going to be 35, you know, who am I going to be at 35? I'm not 35 yet, but you know, like they don't get asked those questions at all. So I think it's important to like ask LGBT and particularly trans and queer youth of color, like, who do you want to be when you grow up, you know, and helping them reach that.
That's so great. Thank you. Vanessa, I wanted to give you an opportunity to say anything about this if you'd like.
Yeah, and I think I would try to also be very careful with, again, just putting, I think, a lot of pressure on young people because, you know, I speak from experience. I mean, having come here and having achieved everything that I've done, for me, I see life as a project, but sometimes when people meet me, like friends or my roommate, she would say, you know, Vanessa, life is not a project. Like you need to sort of like learn how to relax and just have fun. But, you know, a lot of the times, just like we put the pressure on young people how to be, in terms of how to be a woman or how to be a man, I think sometimes you also feel the pressure that you need to be successful. Like you absolutely need to, you know, go to high school, get your high school diploma or GED, go to college, get a degree, get a job, you know, take your hormones, get therapy, like all these things. And it's just also, as I mentioned earlier, is a lot of work and it's very exhausting. And sometimes, you know, we just want to be able to take a break and have people recognize that that's okay, right? Like sometimes I think as parents or caretakers, we put all that pressure into our young people. Like you have to learn how to play piano and go to ballet class and all of that. And everything is so organized. And I don't think that, you know, like for me, like I was forced to to grow up very quickly because I just didn't have a choice. I had to get a job and support myself and support my family, and I had to, you know, do what I needed to do to sort of like be successful and be one of the success stories of, you know, GSS or of Safe Space, which was the agency that used to run my group home. And so I think that, you know, success is not just getting that diploma. Like, it's taking me pretty much the entire time that I have been in the United States to finish my college degree. And I still have one more year left, but I can almost taste it. But it's sometimes, you know, again, success and things just take a really long time for other people. Not every path is the same. You don't have to be 21 and already have a college degree or already transitioned by then. You know, like, I'm so glad that it took my time. I actually didn't go, you know, on a personal, like, maybe TMI, but like, I didn't go through surgery until I was like in my late 20s. And I'm so glad that it took me that long to come to arrive at that decision, because there were a lot of things that I had to take into account before I could, you know, go under the knife and do other things. So I'm just really glad that when I finally made that decision, that I felt like it was the right decision to make. And again, you know, we're not in a race. We're not trying to say, you know, by the time you're 25 or 28, you need to have, you know, breast implants or do this or do that, right? Like, growth and success looks different for every single person because every person's circumstances are different.
Thank you, Vanessa. So powerful. And we end the panel on that note. And I think that is something that will stick with me, you know, that growth and development happens differently for everyone. And, you know, the way that we support our young people and our families through these processes is going to make all the difference. There's so much love for this panel in the chat. I hope you're all taking minutes to see all the support and love that you're getting through the chat. But I do want to give Miles Jackson a minute to introduce the commissioner, who's going to say a few words to close us out. Uh-oh, Miles, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Miles Jackson. He, him, his. I serve on Good Shepherd's LGBTQ work group, and I am also the LGBTQ point person for ACS. So it falls to me as my great privilege to introduce the Commissioner for ACS, David Hansell, who will make a few remarks. Commissioner Hansell, over to you.
Thank you very much, Miles. Good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, happy Pride Month. I am so honored to have the chance to be with you for this. I have to begin with a few thank yous. I want to thank my friend Denise, who has been a real leader in the LGBTQ community, not just in New York City, but nationally. And I'm very proud to have known her and to call her a friend. I want to thank your executive director, Michelle Yancey, who has also been an incredible colleague and friend, and I know has provided just amazing leadership to Good Shepherd Services. And I want to thank the Good Shepherd Services LGBTQ work group, who I understand really put this event together. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you for the whole time, but I did get to hear the last few minutes. And you know, the testimony from the panelists about the personal experiences you've been through, the challenges you face, the inspiration that you discussed was really awesome. And you didn't frame it this way, but I feel pretty confident in knowing that it's that experience, it's that personal experience you've had, that is what inspires the work that you do with young people. and makes the work that you do with young people so real and so important. So I thank you both for what you shared, but I also thank you for the work that you do. I really am excited to be here with you. LGBTQ Pride Month is great, and this is a really exciting week. I missed the beginning, so you may have talked about this already, but this is a really special week, I think, for our community, because we had an incredible victory on Monday. You know, this is a tough time for everyone. It's a tough time for the LGBTQ community, but on Monday, as you all know, I'm sure, the Supreme Court issued an incredibly important ruling, and all the more important because, frankly, I don't think we really expected it out of the Supreme Court. But they said that the law has been on the books since 1964, the Civil Rights Act, protects LGBTQ people from job discrimination, from employment discrimination. That is an incredibly important thing. And so I want to acknowledge it and say that, you know, progress sometimes moves backwards, sometimes moves forwards. Sometimes it feels like 2 steps back, 1 step forward. This is a big step forward, and a really, really big one, an important one, I think, for all of us and for everyone. Because it's not just about the LGBTQ community. This is a victory for equality. It's a victory for human rights. It's a victory for the rule of law. It really benefits everyone. I'm especially happy to be with you. I go very far back with this community in New York City. A few of you know, it's actually nice to see some familiar faces on the Zoom, although I don't know most of you, but I began my career in New York City working at Gay Men's Health Crisis, involved in the fight against HIV and AIDS, going back to the late 1980s and the early 1990s. I worked both in service provision and in advocacy. And that experience really framed for me the rest of the work I've done in the rest of my career. Not just because I realized that I enjoyed being part of the service sector, but also because I learned about the incredible importance and the tremendous difference that government can make in making sure that those who are most vulnerable among us receive the care and the support and the services that they need. And that's really what brought me from AIDS advocacy and AIDS services into government. But I also learned that government, you know, can't do it alone. And actually government can only do it with the support of communities. And it was in the early days of the AIDS era when, frankly, government wasn't really doing what it should have been doing. It was communities. It was communities across New York City. It was communities across the country that came forward and first cared for people, people with AIDS who were sick, people with AIDS who were dying in the early terrible days of that epidemic, but also who fought on the front lines and protested and demonstrated for the rights and the visibility of people with HIV and AIDS and people who were LGBTQ. And so today that has tremendous resonance for me as I see the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests and demonstrations happening on the streets of New York City and across the country, because it really is communities mobilizing in their own defense. And that was something I think that our community did very proudly many, many years ago. I've been in a bunch of different jobs in government. I'm most proud before this job. ACS is the thing I'm most proud of right now, but my last job in government was working in the Obama administration. I worked in the Department of Health and Human Services. I ran what's called the Administration for Children and Families. And during the period that I was there, making sure that we were recognizing and elevating the needs of LGBTQ youth, LGBTQ families all across the country, addressing bullying issues, addressing family acceptance issues, making sure that we were recruiting foster and adoptive families from the community. All of those were among our highest priorities in the time I was there. I was actually very, very honored to be appointed by Secretary Kathleen Sebelius as one of the leaders of the first high-level committee across all of HHS to coordinate LGBTQ services across all of Health and Human Services at the federal level. And so fast forward today, I'm here at ACS, and I am really proud that ACS, and I'm really proud that our community, our child welfare community across New York City has also been recognized for our nationally innovative work and our leading work nationally to support LGBTQ youth and to create an affirming environment for those young people.
I think that is essential to our work in New York City. I think it's essential to our work at ACS. We have to do it not just within ACS, we have to do it with our partner agencies like Good Shepherd Services. We have to do it with advocates. We have to do it with leaders. We have to do it with community representatives. We have to do it with all communities really across the city, because we can only understand what we need to do to respond to the needs of our communities if we actually listen to our communities. I think it's fundamental that in order to protect our young people's safety and their well-being, we have to make sure that they are affirmed, that their identities are honored, and that they are celebrated for who they are. And so that's what we try to accomplish every day at ACS. We try to make sure, and this is an ongoing effort, we try to make sure that we have the right policies and the right practices in place that will empower young people across the spectrum to thrive as healthy, happy, and independent adults. And we also feel that it's our obligation to integrate our work around LGBTQ issues and LGBTQ equity with our work on race, on gender, on class, on disability, because we know that all of these issues are interconnected. And we see this play out in the child welfare and juvenile justice systems all the time. You know this, excuse me, where we see LGBTQ youth of color, especially those youth who identify as gender non-conforming or non-binary. They face so many barriers to equity and opportunity. And so we have to focus on making sure that we are acknowledging them, affirming them, and making sure that they are protected in all of the spaces that we create collectively with our system and working with organizations like yours at Good Shepherd. That work sits at ACS within our Division of Child and Family Wellbeing. We have an Office of Equity Strategies within that office. Within the Office of Equity Strategies, we have a Director of LGBTQ Equity Strategies, Stephen Gordon. If you don't know him, I hope you'll get a chance to meet him very soon. He is providing truly amazing leadership for the work that we're doing. And all of them, our entire Office of Equity Strategies and our Division of Child and Family Wellbeing are doing really remarkable work to make the path brighter for all LGBTQ young people across our child welfare system and our juvenile justice system. So I want to make sure, and I'm committed to making sure that ACS and that New York City continue to lead the way, continue to push forward to be as inclusive as we possibly can, no matter what happens nationally, no matter what happens in the political environment around us. And I believe that throughout Pride Month and all throughout the year, it's important for us to express not just our pride, certainly our pride, but not just our pride, but our promise and our commitment that we will never turn back. All of us in city government, all of us New Yorkers, we have to stay true to our values. We have to continue to make sure that all of us are respected for who we are. All of us have the opportunity to reach our full potential. You, every single one of you, have made the road brighter and more hopeful for many, many, many young people. And I'm very thankful and I appreciate you for that. And it's really because of you that we've made the progress that we have. And together, working together, we will continue to make the future brighter for LGBTQ young people and for all of us in the community. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to share this time with you, and happy Pride Month, and please continue your amazing, amazing work.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. I'm giving you a round of applause. I bet everybody would be. Michelle Yancey is on now and would like to close us out with a few words.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for joining us. What an incredible honor to have you here, and also to hear some of the history from your perspective as someone who walked through it. I just want to add my thanks to yours, to our LGBTQ work group, and most importantly to you, Denise. Denise, you have been such a leader of the work group and of the work, and we would not be where we are right now as an organization without your leadership. And thank you for putting together this panel. I know it was a labor of love, But as powerful as last year's panel was, I didn't think that you could top it, and you did. And so just on behalf of everyone who benefited from this incredible event right now, and also to have it as part of our Good Shepherd Services Pride celebration, thank you for all you did, and thank you to the panelists for sharing your perspective and most importantly, your stories.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and I appreciate all of the kind words. And we just have an amazing LGBT work group. One thing I will say is that the conversations in that work group have been so fulfilling and enriching for me and for all of us that take part in it. So greatly appreciate everybody. I think everybody should unmute themselves and really give a warm thank you to our panel and our moderators.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You
guys are amazing.
You are all amazing. Thank you.
Thank you for the
Happy
honesty.
Pride to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For trusting us to be so vulnerable.
Awesome. Yes, thank you so
God
much.
bless you all. Peace and love.
We will be sending out some resources. Some of the resources that were spoken of today, we'll try to get them out to everybody. And I know Dana just texted me that he will send me some other resources as well. So be on the lookout for that. And again, a big thank you to Vanessa, Tobly, Nyla, Nala, Kevin, and Dana. Just amazing. And Commissioner Hansell as well. Thank you all for being here. Let's do it again next year.
That's right. That's right. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Be safe, everyone.
organizers. Thank you.
No problem. We love
Thank you.